Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Growth Podcast. We have got a special guest for you today, Reuben Torenberg, the first vice president at CBRE. He has been in the commercial real estate game here, helping startups in San Francisco for over 10 years. So we're going to jump into all the nitty gritty about finding cheap office space in San Francisco. So whether you have a company that's already here or you're thinking about moving to San Francisco, this is a great episode for you to learn more about inside baseball of finding a great space, negotiating a great deal, and always making sure that you have the best for your startup at the best price. And speaking of the best at the best price, I want to tell you about my startup, Fondo. Fondo is the all-in-one accounting platform for startups. We support over 1,000 companies with their bookkeeping, taxes, and tax credits in one simple platform with real people, CPAs, and accounting experts that support you when you need it. So whether you want your bookkeeping done and your financial statements monthly, quarterly, or once a year for taxes, we'd love to help you. Check us out at tryfondo.com. And without further ado, let's jump into it. Reuben, thanks so much for joining us on the Startup Growth Podcast. We have Reuben Torenberg, first vice president at CBRE, joining us today. Would love to kick things off, Reuben, with a little bit about your backstory and how you ended up in commercial real estate.
Of course. It's great to see you as always, David. Thanks for having me on. I started in 2014, straight out of school. I thought I wanted to work in sports. I did a bunch of internships and none of them ended up panning out into something that was truly resembling a career. And I've always enjoyed sales and people and, was always a very friendly person, and a good family friend suggested that I get into real estate. I interviewed with one person at CBRE. He knew that I knew nothing, but he saw something in me that I didn't see and told me that I wouldn't make money for a few years, but if I stuck around, I might be able to be something and have an awesome career. And so I am always grateful to him forever. And it really, really did pan out.
Wow, amazing. And so what year was that you joined the real estate game?
So it was 2014, and I was a broker in New Jersey, where I'm from, for the first 3 years. And then I joined a much smaller boutique brokerage firm here in San Francisco called Custom Spaces with Jenny Haig, who is a top of the game real estate mogul here in California. And 9 months into that, CBRE acquired Custom Spaces. And so the joke is that they couldn't keep me away, but really, Jenny was nice enough to keep me along. And we've been working
Love
together
it.
ever since.
Wow. So when you were at Custom Spaces, you were only working with startups as well. Is that right?
Correct. That was the pivot. So when I started, I was helping tenants find office space. And the allure of Custom Spaces was that they really only represent startups, technology firms, and venture capital firms. And it was a 4-person team when I joined, and they had over a 30% market share of tenants represented in San Francisco. And it
Wow.
was a rocket ship well before I got on, and I was very lucky and had awesome timing.
And you did some awesome deals there. This was like, what, 2016-ish?
Late 2016.
Okay, awesome. What was I know you had a lot of big names back then that are like now publicly traded companies. Anything
Yeah.
stand out?
Yeah, some big ones still. Airbnb, Coinbase, Cruise prior to the GM acquisition, to name a few. Dropbox.
Wow.
Um, and at some point, it became too large for a 4-person team to be able to cover. And we ended up taking an acquisition by the largest and best firm in CBRE, who was able to best support our clients.
Wow, that's amazing. And along the way, you started. You're also a founder, so you started a couple of leagues here in San Francisco. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. First, we started SF Hoops. My older brother, Eric Torenberg, shout out to him, had the wonderful idea to just start a league and meet some people here in San Francisco. And so he sent out a tweet. We got 80 signups within 3 days. We found a court, we found some refs, and we were off to the races. And it has been one of the most prideful and proud things I've ever done. It's been a joy since the very start. We do weekly recaps. Now we record the games. We do weekly highlight tapes. Everyone is very involved. There's a lot of friendly competition and banter, and kind of by accident, I fell backwards into the biggest business generator I have.
Wow. And how many seasons you been going now with SF Hoops?
This is season 11. And now we are
Wow.
grateful to even have sponsors like Fondo and
Oh, let's
Windsurf and Arc
go.
who
Wow.
are
Yeah, you have
awesome
some
and so
amazing
supportive.
sponsors. Amazing. We love to support, and you've got such an incredible league going. You've got a lot of heavy hitters in the league. How many people are playing these days?
So we limited at 80 people, but every season we have a
Wow.
wait list of over 30. And we try to do
Wow.
that to keep it exclusive, to keep only great people in the league. Over 50% of every season is occupied by founders. And generally, we really restrict it to people in and around the startup world. We feel very, very lucky to have corralled some of the biggest names in tech.
Amazing. And then you also started a new league, SF Links. Could you tell us a little bit more about that too?
So SF Links was born from SF Hoops. It was such a success. We continue to do it, but during the off seasons, we only do it twice a year. We thought about other potential verticals to go into, and in this case, it's sports. And we love golf. We're not very good at golf, but it's a great medium for folks to get together, to be outside, to network and meet people in a way that's not your traditional happy hour, sipping a drink and trying to make casual conversation. And it also has been a massive hit. And so we're excited to be bringing it back for our second season, starting in a couple weeks. And, it's on its way up.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's, you know, all of us are obsessed with tech and doing our thing, 24/7. And so it's definitely a nice little break to be in these leagues and like, meet people on a non-working basis and make some friends and have some fun. So yeah, thanks for doing that,
Definitely.
man. We
Of
love that.
course. Of course.
And yeah, I mean, so I think it would be awesome to talk about, you've been in the SF commercial real estate game now for almost a decade. You've helped tons of startups. You've helped, publicly traded tech companies. So I think it would be helpful to just kind of, maybe explain a little bit about how startups work with brokers, and just in general, how do startups, let's just start with how do startups find office space in San Francisco, and who can help them?
Sure. So I'll kind of go macro and work my way in. Generally, if you don't use a broker, you can use the Googles of the world, the Craigslist of the world. There's a website called LoopNet where you can search for listings and they'll give you some sort of rates, but it's very tedious work. You need to call the brokers, get all the rates, go tour spaces yourself, negotiate the deals yourself, work with every single vendor that's part of an office transaction, whether it's contractors, architects, real estate attorneys, furniture vendors, pretty much everyone you need to get your space situated. You don't really have too much background knowledge on what's available currently, what's coming available, what's recently been leased, where spaces are getting leased. So you're kind of working without, a true target in hand. Generally, when you want to do this or when you want to bring an expert in, you would hire a real estate broker, someone in our position, a tenant representation real estate broker. They work for you from the very beginning and kind of act as your shepherd through the lease transaction. So they run a market survey to show you everything that's available within your specs. They have relationships with every single vendor who may need to help you throughout the lease transaction. They help you negotiate the lease and understand where economics currently are, where they should be, and where they're headed. They help you, you know, understand whether you're getting a good deal or not by sending you relevant lease comparables called lease comps in our business of where recent deals have been completed to help you understand if you're getting a good rate. They understand the market standard of where deals should be done. I'll give you an example of how much tenant improvements you should get on your space based on the lease term, the rent, etc. How much free rent you should be getting in a lease based on the term in which you lease it, and what other tenants have gotten in that building, and just help you secure the best deal possible. They're paid strictly on commission by the landlord. So it's effectively free for a tenant to bring in a real estate broker. And the saying is that, not using a real estate broker in a real estate transaction is like going to court without a lawyer. You're kind of just coming in blind and, shooting your shot and hoping that what you got is a good deal for you without any sort of background knowledge or data on what's truly relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest thing to realize for founders is just that it's free. For founders, it's free to work with a broker, and it's free to find the best space and get the best deal. I think a lot of founders are always trying to save money, rightfully so. And so they may just like overlook that, and I get hit up in my inbox. I see it on the founder forums, like people looking for office space. And I think a lot of founders don't realize that you should and can work with a broker and it's free for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a huge misconception. So that's great to clear that up.
Yeah. Let's double click on that for a second.
Yeah, yeah.
So another big part of it is even kind of just avoiding the standard pitfalls that people run into when you're leasing office space. I'll give you a couple examples. So, San Francisco, especially prior to COVID, was very much a landlord's market. And startups, when you're going to lease office space, try to even just get a grasp on like how much space you should lease, right? The general metric for startups is roughly 125 square feet per person. In professional services, it's roughly 200 square feet per person and potentially more. Compare that to WeWork, which is like 75 square feet per person. And it gets a little cramped. And when you're leasing these spaces, you don't even, y- it, there's no standard on how long you should lease the space for. And especially before COVID, landlords were requiring you to complete 3-year leases, 5-year leases at a minimum. And most of these startups don't have headcount projections past 12 months, maybe even 6 months in some cases. They're growing so quickly that they frequently ended up leasing space, being in it for 6 months, and then having to turn around and find new space and sublease their other space for, the remaining 2.5 or 4.5 years and losing money on it. And even in these situations, you're taking space that's not furnished, that's not wired. You need to spend money to get it all up and running. When in reality, if you're a rapidly growing startup, you generally want to skew on maximizing your flexibility and minimizing your initial capital expenditure or capex. So you want to take space that's fully furnished, that's fully wired, that already has an internet provider in the space, that typically doesn't require a lot of tenant improvements. You don't have to go through the permitting process and you can be in the space immediately. And you want the flexibility to be able to grow out of it without, experiencing the pain of being in two spaces and paying double rent. So these are just a few examples where engaging a real estate broker can help you avoid some of those pitfalls.
Yeah, and so okay, so how has the market changed? And then let's jump into the Q1 2025 report. But how has it changed? Sort of, you mentioned pre-COVID, post-COVID. What are some of the big changes you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, the large one is really went from being a landlord's market to a tenant's market. The average asking rate in San Francisco in Q1 2020, before March 13th or whenever it was $88 a foot. As
And
of
that and
Q2
that's
2020,
88. That's $88 times the number of square feet per year, right?
correct,
Okay.
correct, correct. And so that was actually the highest in the country, just above New York. Right now, we're at almost 25% cheaper at $68 per square foot per year. And so really during COVID, demand stopped and our market tanked. Um, Over 5 million square feet of sublease space hit the market. Tenants were vying to get out of their spaces for cheap. As time went on, they grew even more desperate, and you found spaces that were leased originally at $85, $90 a foot, being subleased and turned around for $30 a foot, $35 a foot, $40 a foot. And these incoming tenants who were still figuring out how they wanted to occupy the space were getting top of the line space for cheap. And so everything turned, and you know these spaces that were originally getting leased in a matter of days and weeks were now sitting on the market for months and years. And landlords originally didn't feel the pain as much, felt that everything was going to come back. As time went, 21, 22, 23, vacancy continued to grow. We were 3% vacant before COVID. Now we're at 37% vacancy, which is finally stopping its increase. And we're starting to see demand and leasing activity grow again. And so there has been just so much opportunity for tenants and specifically AI companies now to get top of the line space at, really, really cheap rents. And the smart ones are locking in long-term deals at those cheap rents, which are going to look really, really good in, 2, 3 years as leasing velocity continues to go up and rents go up with it.
Wow. And so What what has been happening to these landlords? Like, who owns most of this real estate in San Francisco? Have people been selling? Are they just waiting? Are people refinancing?
So refinancing is just a very difficult discussion because interest rates have been so high. A lot of the owners are large institutional companies, both local and a lot of foreign money. And for a while, call it the first 3 years of the pandemic, they were holding on, continuing to pay their loans. The leases hadn't really come up yet. They weren't experiencing as much vacancy. These tenants who weren't operating their spaces were still paying rent. And so they were kind of surviving. And only in the last 12 to 18 months has that bubble really burst. And these landlords have been forced to either sell their spaces for pennies on the dollar, call it 50 to 80% discounts, or these buildings have been going back to the bank and the bank had been, forced to find a new landlord for similarly pennies on the dollar. And what's happened in these situations is these new landlords who are able to come in with a significantly lower basis are finally able to lower rents because they can afford to. Whereas previously they were trying to stick to their high rents and continuing to experience vacancy. And so now tenants can lease spaces in these nicer Class A, several of them Class A buildings at rents that are 20 to 30% cheaper than what they were leasing pre COVID.
Wow. And so has the value of these buildings gone down? Like, has the market changed in the past, year or two?
Oh, yeah, in a big way. Those who are forced to sell right now are unfortunately taking 50 to 80% losses. Valuations are down pretty much across the board, with a few exceptions, of course, of the premier trophy assets. And several of these landlords are now repositioning their buildings and adding amenities, redoing spec suites, adding tenant conference centers and gyms and parking, and doing everything they can to make themselves more competitive to tenants, which they hadn't really had to do since the 70s because they've always been spoiled and have always been able to get tenants based on the quality of the location and the fact that there's just so much demand here in San Francisco.
Wow. And so this budget of, tenant improvements, when you lease a building from a landlord, there's sometimes a budget that they give you for improvements, right? And if you try to do this on yourself, you might not know this. So like what is the inside baseball on tenant improvements?
So the short answer is that it varies. Every building is a little bit different. It will depend on the quality of the space, the length of term that you lease the space for, the landlord themselves. Institutional landlords will provide more tenant improvements as opposed to mom and pop landlords who will try and give you a lower rent and more free rent for you to do your own work. But as a generality, the longer term of a lease you complete, the more improvements the landlord is willing to give you. And if you're a startup, you generally want to aim for what's called turnkey improvements, which means the landlord does all the work for you. You don't have to worry about anything, and you can walk in and turn the key, and the space is going to be brand new and completed to your spec. And the reason you want to do this is because you are building your own startup and you don't want to spend 3 to 6 months improving a space, hiring contractors, having weekly meetings, hiring furniture vendors to furnish the space, hiring an architect to design a space plan, going into the city for permits and approvals, and racking up costs because things became delayed and you're not experienced in completing construction projects and instead of building your startup. And so generally you want to put as much of this onus on the landlord as you can. And similar to a residential apartment, largely because you're not the one benefiting from these improvements in the long term. It's them. You get to experience these for the duration that you're in the space, but it's a lease. You don't own it. Eventually you're going to move and they will get to inherit those improvements.
Yeah. And so what is like what's some advice around, okay, you go look at a space, it's listed at, you know, $60 a foot. What's your advice on like the first offer that a startup should make on a lease? And yeah, what are the levers for them?
Understand the situation. Does has anyone else sent a proposal for this space? Is the landlord close to a deal with another group? How long has this space been on the market? If it's been on the market for a while, there's no other interest in the space, there's a lot of vacancy in the building, you can come in aggressive. Maybe 10, 20, even in some situations when it's been on the market forever, 30% below what they're asking. You always want to set an aggressive anchor, but at the same time, if you really want the space, you don't want to be too aggressive that the landlord doesn't take you seriously or the landlord chooses another group. So you have to kind of balance those levers. Some landlords are more concerned about keeping rents high and will give more free rent and tenant improvement concessions because when a landlord is going to sell a building, the first thing that a buyer will look at is the rent roll. And the higher the rent roll, the bigger the valuation. Other landlords who are keeping their buildings forever just want to get rent in the door and get rid of their vacancy. And so they're willing to drop their rents and give you a significantly lower rent and give you free rent so that you can complete your own improvements and make the space your own. So it really varies, is the long answer, or is the short answer. I just shared the longer part of it. But really, you always want to send at least two proposals and have at least two legitimate options. One, so that you can leverage one against the other and help achieve better terms. And two, in case your top option falls through, you have a backup because sometimes you can't control every piece of the pie. Sometimes you'll send an offer on what you think is a good deal, and another tenant will come in and offer better terms, and you're out. And so you have to have a good understanding of the situation, have a broker who's locked in on what's going on in the building, was a good relationship with the landlord, who has done deals in the building before, and it'll help you, navigate the best path forward.
Yeah. And what about tenant improvements? Is that something you throw in there? You said turnkey is the best thing to ask for. Um, what's a good benchmark, or what's a good rule of thumb for tenant improvements?
Yeah. There is no exact science to this. And it also varies based on construction costs, where they are, the quality of the space. If a space is in shell condition and you're offering a 5 year term in a Class A building, you can get, you know, sometimes up to $100 a foot, maybe even 150 in certain circumstances. In other buildings, they'll offer you 25 to 30 if the space is built out and mostly ready to go. And if a space is recently improved, they're not going to offer you anything. So there's no general rule of thumb,
Mm,
but the three levers that you can pull are rent, free rent, and tenant improvements, at least in terms of the initial economics. There are various
mm.
other terms that you can negotiate: termination options, renewal options, low security deposit, rights of first offer, rights of first refusal, things that will help you kind of have optionality and flexibility during the term. But from an economic standpoint, those three initial levers are the ones that you want to pull. And depending on the situation, the quality of the space, the term of the lease, the timing of everything, you have to choose accordingly.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for all that background. Now I think is a good time to jump into Q1. So what's the latest on SF real estate Q1 2025?
So I'm happy to finally say that things are looking up in such an awesome way. For those of us who've been here since before the pandemic, it has been a long and winding ride with a lot of twists and turns. And some cool stats to share are that this past quarter in Q1, we had 2.9 million square feet leased. It was the highest leasing total since Q2 of 2019.
Wow.
Typically, especially post COVID, we've been dominated by tech. AI has come in and bolstered up our market in a huge way. Of the top 25 deals that occurred, tech tenants represented 60% of the square footage leased. Of all that square footage leased, 91% of it was in Class A buildings. What we're having right now is
Mm,
what's called a flight to quality, where tenants are seeing that rates are low. Rates are lower across the board than what they used to be. And so tenants are sensing opportunity and saying, okay, I can get awesome space on the cheap, so I might as well go for the best spaces because I can get them for cheap and lock them in for longer terms. And so those spaces in Class A buildings that are quality, that are ready to go, are getting snatched up quickly, while the, call it, Class B space world, spaces that are still pretty nice but lower quality or need some work or have some kind of flaws, are taking longer to get leased. And as these Class A buildings continue to go quickly, tenants will start looking for other options, and Class B spaces will be next. Spaces that are, you know, disheveled or extremely dated or just haven't been occupied for a while are in a much more difficult situation because we're still 38% vacant, and a lot of that needs to get snatched up before tenants are going to start considering spaces in, Class C buildings. And it's also very segmented by location. Lower Soma in San Francisco has been hit hardest by COVID. That in Union Square, and Union Square is making an awesome comeback, and it's beautiful to see. But Lower Soma continues to struggle. It's got by far the highest vacancy and by far the lowest asking rents. So it also is very neighborhood dependent. I'd say our hottest market right now, or hottest markets, are Mission Bay and Jackson Square. OpenAI has snatched up most of the quality space in Mission Bay. Visa has taken a ton of space at the new Mission Rock complex, which is beautiful, just behind the ballpark. And now the Warriors have taken more space there, and WorldCoin just took space nearby, right in Soma, near Mission Bay. And then Jackson Square has really experienced a supreme uptick in activity, as where in South Park, back in the day, South Park used to be the cool area to be for all the VCs, and now that has largely transferred to Jackson Square.
Oh, interesting. And what about the Mission? Are startups still moving to the Mission?
They're certainly still moving to the Mission. There are some amazing spaces there, and OpenAI used to be there before they moved to Mission Bay, and now X.AI has taken a lot of their space. Um, IDEO also has beautiful space. Sequoia has beautiful space in the Mission. There's just a lot less inventory there, and it's harder to come by great spaces. So tenants are, AI companies are taking space in the Mission and Potrero Hill. There just isn't that much infrastructure to really prop up the market in the same way that
Yeah.
there is in South FiDi or in FiDi or in Jackson Square.
And Hayes Valley had a moment, when Cerebral Valley became a thing. What's going on with that? Are people still opening offices there? What's going on in Hayes Valley?
They certainly still want to open office space there. There's just such little inventory. It's not even relative to availability. There's just very, very little inventory, that barely any space is available. You can't really find quality space in Hayes Valley. We talk to AI companies every day who tell us that they want to be in Hayes Valley, but we can't come up with any available spaces that are relevant for their use. And the spaces that we do find are super dated, need a ton of work, require more term. And so, looking for great space there is like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so if I'm a startup, let's say I just raised 500K to 2 million or so. Currently, two-person team, but expect to hire like 5 or 6 more people in the next year. Like, what is my go-to? Like, what neighborhood am I looking at? How much square feet? What do you recommend for those folks?
So when you're that small, it's it's very difficult to justify having your own office, because anything less than 1,000 square feet, which would fit, call it 5 to 7, is something that's not really going to last you very long. And when you're taking a direct space, usually the minimum commitment you'll need to make is a year. And previously, you were seeing a lot of tenants take spaces in LiveWorks, which will allow 1 year term. They're a little bit cheaper than traditional space, and that's still the case, and certainly still happens. But what we found to be significantly more efficient and easier for startups is taking co-working space. You can start in a WeWork or an Industrious or a Mindspace or a Canopy, pay, you know, per person a significantly lower cost than taking your own office, and everything is there for you. You don't need to furnish it. You can move in a couple of weeks. There's concierge teams that help with everything that you need. They've got breakfast there ready for you, as you know, in Industrious. They offer short-term flexibility. You can also grow within them. At once you get to 4 people, you can go take another suite, and they'll just rip up your agreement and do a quick new one. And it allows you that flexibility to become ready to go get your own space. And generally, that metric, what
Mhm.
we've seen is when you're around, call it somewhere between 8 and 10 people, and you're really starting to grow out of these co-working spaces, that you can then start to consider getting your own space, and, having space that has a couple conference rooms and closed spaces for you to take calls. Because when you're in a space that's 500 to 700 feet, it's just a wide open area. Maybe it has a kitchen. You're lucky if it has one meeting room. And if you go into a co-working
Yeah.
space, you can take your pick of the litter. You can hop in a phone room. You can host events at the space. You can really utilize what they were made for. And co-working spaces are having a moment. So we're excited for them, and we partner with all of them. They're great.
Oh, wow. So startups can work with a broker and still find co-working space, and
Totally.
often get
Totally.
pretty good deals.
they can get better deals than what they would do going themselves because the co-working operators all work with us pretty frequently and they incentivize us by providing discounts to our clients so that we bring them more of our tenants. So it's a virtuous circle on both sides. They get better, more deal flow, more activity. They lease their spaces. The client gets a better deal on those spaces and more visibility into co-working spaces. And the broker gets to negotiate better deals and they happen a lot faster and are a little more cut and dry, right? You're not negotiating tenant improvements, or if you are, it's very rare in co-working spaces.
Wow. Okay. So, all right. So once I'm, 8 to 10 people, I'm looking for my own, dedicated space. I'm out of the co-working space. Like what, you know, for people who are coming in from out of town, maybe not in SF, they're moving to SF, they're in that 8 to 10 person, stage, expecting to grow. Like what are the neighborhoods you recommend?
It'll vary. I'll say a bunch that are all good neighborhoods and it'll depend on what you like and where you're coming from and where you're commuting from. But generally you want to be commutable. So you want to be either along the BART line or along Caltrain, which allows you to be in Soma, allows you to be in South Financial District, kind of where Salesforce Tower is and Salesforce Park is. You can do Jackson Square, you can do Financial District. There's just a ton of great inventory at really friendly rates. You can go into the Mission because you can use 16th Street BART. Neighborhoods like Potrero Hill and the Dog Patch are a little bit tougher at that stage. But my main advice for a tenant in that range and is growing quickly is to make sure that you're maintaining your flexibility. What we frequently do for our clients is we put them in subleases, which have significantly shorter term, right? You're benefiting because you are taking someone else's remaining term, whether it's a year, 16 months, 18 months, 24 months. You are usually inheriting all of their furniture. So you skip the whole process of having to purchase furniture, have it delivered, pay for the labor to have it installed, look for new or used furniture, work with vendors, etc. You just walk in and can start working, and which also presents you with a significantly cheaper or significantly shorter timeline. And it's also fully wired and ready to go. So you don't have to wire it from from the jump. And that's alone can be $5 to $7 a foot if the proper infrastructure isn't in place. And by the way, if internet infrastructure isn't in place, it can sometimes take 30 to 45 days to get that set up. So you're skipping a lot of these, difficult pitfalls that people don't think of on the daily. And we only think of because we have to do it every day.
And what is like sort of the up and coming, most inventory place where you're going to find the best deals right now?
At the moment, I would say it's either in Soma, kind of by the ballpark, Upper Soma, I'd call it, north of or upwards of 4th Street, or in North Beach. You're finding a lot of really great deals. Landlords who have really great space are offering it on the cheap as tenants expand from Jackson Square and want to consider that upper neighborhood. I'd also consider Potrero Hill, even though it's a little bit less walkable. There's a lot of cool tech inventory and it's being offered for pretty cheap rates.
Awesome. And any last insights you want to share about Q1?
So I would just double click on location. It matters more than ever. For reference, 95% of the leases that were completed were signed either in the CBD, which is Financial District and South Financial District, kind of, that upper area by the Montgomery and Embarcadero BART stations, or in South of Market. So location is always, the key prime indicator of real estate, and it continues to be the case and will continue to be the case. And if you are a tenant looking for space here, I would just say to make sure that you maximize your flexibility and make sure that you are leaving no stone unturned in your search.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And what are some ballpark ranges we can expect? So if let's talk about a 5 person company, a 10 person, and then 25 person plus. Is there some sort of high level numbers we can think about for each of those groups?
Sure. If you're a 5 person tenant, I'll just use monthly rates. And this will all vary in terms of quality, location, term, building. So don't hold me to any of these, but general ranges for startups trying to stay on the cheaper end. 5 person office, anything from 3 to 6K a month. 10 person office, anything from 6 to 9K a month, 25-person office, anything from for 13, 14K up to 20, 25K a month. And, there will be so many buildings that don't match these criteria. But if you are within those realms, you are able to get quality space at below market rates. And frequently you can get it furnished. More and more landlords are starting to furnish space because they know that's what tenants need. And that is a significant cost that you're saving every time you go into a space that's furnished. Not only because you have to buy it then, but also because you don't have to deal with getting rid of it, moving it somewhere else. It just becomes another item on your balance sheet that you don't have to have.
Awesome. Awesome, Ruben. This is super helpful, man. I'm excited to kick off our search together for Fondo. So yeah, thanks again for joining. Excited to talk to you again next quarter and see if the occupancy continues to grow.
Always, always, David. It's an honor to be on your pod. It's an honor to be your friend, and
You're the
I'm
man,
looking forward
Ruben.
to getting started, man.
Likewise, Ruben. Thank you so much, man.
All right, much love. Take care.
Much love.